Thank you for the reading of Scripture. Friends, what does it mean to this question? Because every one of us experiences it differently. But the bottom line is that we all wrestle with the call of God in one way or another. We wrestle with it in order to find out if we are really called. Sometimes we think of ourselves as not suitable for God's call. In such instances, we think of others and ready for the call than ourselves. What normally leads this standards have implied that some people are more qualified than others, more deserving than others. I'm not saying that standards are bad. Standards are good. However, inasmuch as these standards have worked to create order, discipline, or whatever is good for us, they are not meant to be a barrier to the call of God. They are not meant to be a barrier to the call of God. And so today, I invite you to journey with me in this text and discern how God calls people into God's ministry, how God calls us, how God called Matthew to join God's ministry. Perhaps we can identify how God deals with the standards that prohibit certain peoples to be part of God's ministry. Particularly in this chapter we have read, Matthew helps us to see or discover how God calls people. In this story, God's call is indiscriminate and comes unexpected to God's people or to Matthew. We see in this story that how Jesus calls Matthew to become one of his disciples. Matthew does not have a religious background that could immediately qualify him as the deserving person in the eyes of the religious peoples or authorities. He is a tax collector who was called from a tax booth. Matthew was called when he was busy using his time and energy to generate income for the government. This is the work that paid for his bills and his family bills. This is the work that kept him in the social fiber of the community. This is the work that gave him status as a worker in the community. But his work and the people in those offices were despised by the community for working for the oppressive government or working with the oppressive government. The story of Jesus and Zacchaeus is another example that the gospel writers offer to show us how the tax collectors exploited the people by overtaxing. On the other side, the gospel writers show us how Jesus called and welcomed the despised tax collectors to follow him and eat with him. We can find this story in Luke 19, verse 1 to 10. Despite being a despised person, this is the person, Matthew is the person who is called by Jesus to be one of his disciples. Jesus says to Matthew, "Follow me." The idea conveyed here is beyond literal meaning of following. It is an active following, walking with Jesus. It is also listening to Jesus' call that invites us to fellowship. to letting go of all competing allegiances to be devoted followers of Jesus. This is what Matthew signs up for when he follows Jesus. He follows the path that contradicts the much preserved standards of the religious, political, and economic powers. I can only imagine this movement as one from the comfort zone, or I can also understand it as one known from the margins to the center of radical community reforms. Matthew is called to join Jesus and learn with others how God appends the networks and systems of injustices or established standards that enslave God's people. When we follow Jesus, we become aware of the evil and injustices happening in the world. We don't celebrate any system or person perpetuating injustices against the persons. Rather, we begin to see things from the perspective of God and God's reign. Here and wherever God's people are called into God's ministry, we are called to enter a ministry of love. We are called to a ministry of justice. We are called to a ministry of care or equity. Through this call that Matthew received, we are able to see ourselves invited again, indiscriminately and unexpectedly, to participate in the transformation agenda of God. Whoever, whatever, or wherever we are, God calls us to walk, learn, and participate. Is this not good news that Jesus extends a call to people like you and me? Jesus requires nothing but to follow him. This welcoming and inclusive love of God is extended to many tax collectors and sinners who sat and ate with Jesus. Jesus breaks the barriers. During this time, the Jewish religious context created a standard that excluded some people, such as tax collectors, outcasts, or sinners, to have any contact with those deemed religiously clean. Because Jesus was a Pharisees expected him to honor these religious standards and traditions. The Pharisees were shocked to see Jesus sit and eat with the tax collectors and sinners. Perhaps the Pharisees asked one another, how can a just and righteous person sit and eat with unclean people? The Pharisees could not hold back, but asked the disciples of Jesus. They asked, why does your teacher eat with the tax collectors and sinners? But here is the twist of the story. Jesus responded with what would help them understand God's love for all. He uses an illustration of a physician and a patient. Jesus tells them that healthy people do not need a doctor, but sick people do. Jesus wants the Pharisees to understand his current actions in relation to this image or example of a doctor and patient relationship. Once they get the meaning, it will dawn in them that God desires mercy rather than sacrifices, and that Jesus is here not for a selected few people, but Jesus has come for all, including the unclean people, the despised people, the alienated people, the outcast, or sinners, as Pharisees called them. In this regard, we rejoice. We rejoice knowing that Jesus does not reject the broken, the outcast, or despised, but he dwells among us, sovereignly drawing us closer to him and to enter into a covenant relationship out of his love and grace. The struggle of the Pharisees was to understand that Jesus is here regardless of who they are. This breaking down of the barriers and walls to build bridges was inconceivable for those in the religious powers. They expected the outcast, particularly Matthew, to follow the ritual purity before he could come near to the mission of God. The invitation of Jesus shattered the Pharisees, shattered them. It made them uncomfortable because it denounced self-righteousness, which was used to maintain spiritual and social dominance in the community. By sitting and eating with the outcasts, Jesus stripped the powerful of their pride and exposed their structures of exclusion. When the vulnerable people are liberated, they are empowered to see, resist, and denounce evil. This liberating, transforming, and rejuvenating work of Christ was regarded as scandalous by the religious, powerful people. The calling of the outcast by Jesus to come into the inner circle was a direct, scandalous assault on the religious and social power of the Pharisees. And truly, God's call is scandalous. God's call is scandalous to those that think that God is only for them, not for others. God's indiscriminate and unexpected call is scandalous to the oppressive system and its peoples because it liberates and welcomes the excluded or oppressed peoples. It elevates the marginalized and welcomes the unwanted people into the community of God. God's call is scandalous as it transforms the person and the structures of the community against the wishes of the oppressor. The unclean are accepted and made whole. God's call is a yes to freedom, love, community, or abundant life. God's call is a no to anything that is evil and foreign to God's design of life. God's call breaks the standards by calling those that are deemed undeserving to join the faith community. God calls everyone. It can be someone from the streets, pews, as we've gathered here, or any place. Any place. God calls people here. God calls people there to participate in building God's community, to saying yes to love, yes to care, and no to hate, no to violence. Here or anywhere in the world, people are called. We are called from the pews to share our gifts and talents, whoever we are. When called, we bring something new, perhaps new life to the community. As long as it is God calling, it will remain an indiscriminate and unexpected call. In this way, we are all suitable for ministry. If no one is left out, we can remind ourselves that Jesus continues to call us the way we are. He is calling us to come and seek the ways of wisdom. When we gather and follow Jesus, we learn, walk, and listen to him. We are empowered to participate in telling the story of Jesus. Telling the story of Jesus. We are invited to sit and eat with Jesus at the table. We are invited to sit and eat with Jesus at the table. We learn how to open our homes, our church building, and spaces to one another as we share the amazing love and grace of God. And so, as we get into this year's summer, let us remember that we are called to walk with Jesus. This is an indiscriminate and unexpected call. May God bless us in our faith journey now and always.